All right, Gulli Bot meeting for June 17th, 2022. I was having to convert the number month to the string. Let me share screen. So our only real topic today so far is my attempt to put the QI debate in a logical-ish form, and it was fascinating. I think, so I'll get your opinion on this. I think that we'll need to probably step back, or at least down. I don't know the terminology for this yet, but go lower in the tree and not kind of work on the top level debate on whether it should or should not be done, just because, not even because of the data being shared in between, but because the math at the top is beyond where we're at right now. But let me show you what I was thinking and see what you think. So I had to go through it back to first principles several times. Let me find my document. And so I kind of did all this stuff, but then I was thinking about it, and I said, you know what? Here's the way that if you were charged with making this decision, what would it really be about? And so the goal is to reduce, and there's several ways to say this, but the main goal, which I think we had, was reduce excessive harm to people. But the trade-off to people that are not police officers, I guess we should actually say, just because we have the officers in another claim down here.
Yeah, counting them twice would skew the weight.
Yeah. And to make it overly complex when we can just clarify. Yeah. So how much, so the question is, how much will it increase excessive harm to officers? I guess that is the right next one. How much will it increase costs? Because there's some overlap there, but I think they're two different things.
There actually isn't any real overlap there. It's something in the low hundredths of a percentile of cases where officers pay any of the costs of lawsuits.
Well, harm is in as far as getting shot. And
yeah, well, I meant in terms of you said there's some overlap between costs and harm, and there isn't really any cost harm to officers.
Well,
not in terms of QI.
If they are shot, then it'll increase the costs to the so the harm to the officers will increase the costs to the city. So
okay, yes, to the city. I was just thinking the officers themselves.
Yeah.
Municipality is probably the most accurate word for this.
Yeah, I was trying to think. And then, yeah, how much will it increase municipality costs? We could also indirectly say taxes, although I guess there's too much involved in that anyways. But yeah, costs. How much will it reduce the enforcement of laws? And the caveat here that cannot be offset with spending. So I guess it doesn't actually matter to go into the details of all this, but how much will it in theory increase crime? Now I'm just thinking, is increasing crime and no, yeah, these are two slightly different things. So it can reduce the actual enforcement, and then that secondarily might incentivize people to do more crimes, some people are claiming. But regardless of all the details of that, the thing is that to weigh these things up against each other, I have to calculate how much the person making the decision, or the people, how much we value the harm coming to people that aren't police officers compared to the harm coming to police officers, among all this other stuff. And even though I think Gulli Bot eventually can be used in that manner, that's a very advanced situation to handle trade-offs like that. So I'm thinking the lesson learned from all this work is that we need to stay away from for now, stay away from the actual decision-based ones and talk about kind of like the is and the more of a fact checking and less of a decision making claims, which I hate. I can tell you why I was reluctant to do that in the beginning. But from what I've said so far, does that sound kind of like logical, or do you see any holes in it? Or are the words coming out of my mouth making any sense also?
So by and large, yes, it does make sense. I don't think it's quite as all is nothing as you're reaching, but it's not far off from that. The
Yeah, I mean,
difficulty would be
there's some decisions we might make to where there's just a whole, if this is where we're going, there's some decisions that we might make that there's just a whole bunch of false stuff out there. If we prove those falses, then the decision is obvious. But a decision like this where you're weighing two different things.
Yeah, like if we're looking at this as an example, there's not a lot of data available to answer any of these, though the early data that we have is pretty lopsided. Like we just aren't seeing changes in crime rates in places without QI, and we aren't seeing officers actually quitting or refusing to enforce the law.
Yeah.
Which is for a number of
Yeah, so I
reasons,
mean,
but it's
if
small data.
if we had evidence and could go through each of these and prove them all false except for the positive one, then we don't have to weigh the difference in harm between the people and the officers.
Mhm.
But if we don't find that, then we do.
Yeah, but
And that's the thing that I'm intuitively thinking there will be a way later on for us to compare these two things, these two values, but I just don't want to go there yet. So we could go deeper into the argument if we wanted to reuse some of this data. Like if we thought we could prove any of these, if it was helpful to prove any of these individual ones, or just debunk some things that have been proven wrong in the space of qualified immunity, then we could choose that data.
I'm going to interrupt for a question here.
Sure.
Is the goal of moving down the tree to focus on smaller questions, or is the goal to reduce the size of the question down so much that there isn't going to be a lot of inputs into it? Which are related, but I think slightly different.
It's to not have a question that requires us to have two different values that we have to quantify together. Like, let's say we did find that there's evidence that police officers will get hurt more, and there's evidence that it will reduce harm to people. How we then have to figure out, well, what's the relationship between those two numbers?
I suspect that even if we narrow it down, we'll find that there are multiple factors to answer the basic questions as well.
Well, yeah, so that, yes, in a situation like this, but if we go down far enough, like, you know, if the question is, does it increase? If we ask does instead of should, then that's one clear way to kind of make sure we're below that line of complexity. So I think, you know, does it reduce excessive harm to people? If there were studies that studied that, which I don't know if there are.
I suppose the question then is, what value are we providing by using Gulli Bot for this? It starts feeling like it's a misapplication of reason score if it's not able to handle the questions that we ultimately wanted to be able to respond to.
Well, there's several levels of complexity of questions, because even beyond this question of, should we do this, it's like we have a problem, we have 5 different proposals, we need to weigh those proposals, and each of those proposals are trading off different values. So there's something even more complex than this. So Gulli Bot provides value in that whole range of decision making, or evaluation of facts, right, in that scale. So, but I'm working bottom up from simpler to more complex. So it still provides value, because the main thing, like if you have, compare it to PolitiFact or Snopes, right? People don't believe those resources, I mean, because they feel they're biased, and they feel they're biased because, well, among other things, 2 of the things that they're not doing that keeps them in that kind of feel like biased camp is they're not completely showing their epistemic work, like how they made that decision, like numerically, and they're not open to feedback from people that have concerns. So Gulli Bot is directly adding in the kind of epistemic claim analysis.
I mean, yes, they don't show their exact grading rubric for reaching it, but they do also go in much further depth about the lines of reasoning to reach the conclusion than we do with just numerical calculation.
Well, they write it out in prose.
Yeah,
and they
2
don't
different
list.
approaches.
They often don't list the negative things that they dismissed. It's like someone saying, this is true because here's a study that says it's true, and it's like they're not listing the 5 other studies that said it was false and why they're not including those.
Yeah.
So that's typically how they kind of fail in that, and it's all in prose, right? So it's not as useful. And we're just trying to increase the efficacy. So one of the uses of the tool, the simpler one, is making fact checking. It's improving fact checking by like 10% or 1% or something like that.
I will
And
also
then,
add, thinking back to the times where I've been talking with people and they didn't trust PolitiFact or Snopes, in none of those situations did they actually have logical arguments against it. It was born of the fact they just didn't like the conclusions being reached.
well, that's the way
That's
everyone is
anecdotal.
with everything, but you don't have a mechanism for pushing back against that. There's no incentive for them to put in the work to find out their reasons, right? And not everyone will, but it sets up the situation to where you can. So if someone disagrees with you on something that's in Gulli Bot, on Snopes, you have to say, oh, we'll go and read their paragraphs, and they'll go in there and they'll say, not just because, if they actually decide to sit down and have a discussion with you, and you pulled up the Snopes thing and you talked it through, they're going to be able to find too many things in the vagueness of how it's written to where the conversation can't go anywhere. But with Gulli Bot, you could say, okay, so here's the 3 top things. Which of those do you agree with, or which of those don't you agree with? right? So you can go through, rather than having to read several paragraphs and dig into it, you can quickly figure out where the disagreement is. And it's like, well, if in this case, if Gulli Bot's wrong, you just, tell me where it's wrong in here and we'll fix it. So they have an opportunity to fix it, which encourages them once again to think through it. It's not a huge increase, but it is an increase. I mean, no one can say Gulli Bot's biased, because the comeback to that is it's biased because you haven't put in your information yet. So it's as biased as long as you let it be biased. So that's your fault if it's biased. It's not my fault. So it puts the onus back on the other person. It's just adding incentives to the current fact checking system.
Yeah, I do think that that will carry a little less weight since it's then filtered through our moderation in adding things.
Well, at least it's possible. It's going from 0 to 1 out of 100. So it depends on how quickly we do that and how honestly, but also it's done through Twitter. So at any point, anyone can pull up a claim and say, well, here's 5 things on Twitter you haven't responded to. So there is accountability built into it. But yeah, it's not perfect, but it's better than what we have today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm curious as to whether the user experience of it will feel like it bears that out.
Well, yeah. Yeah, so the experiment is to see that if you have a fully curated system with limited resources, can you make it work? Can you make it stumble along? And not that you'd convince everybody, because a lot of people will give up, but will there be a movement of a couple people? And then if that happens, then it's worth putting more money and time in.
Mhm. Okay, so zooming back out, if we're going to be shifting down the tree, like, are each of these points as far down as we'd want to zoom, or would we want to go further? Or are we deciding that?
Yeah, I think we have to look at each and decide whether they're at a right level for us to do, or we could also say we could go to a different topic also if we wanted to. So I hadn't thought that. I mean, I started thinking into it, but I didn't come into any decisions. And part of it might have been that the claims aren't really organized in this way. So I'd have to read through all the claims. And you having done it, you might have a more intuitive feel on these. But also, one other concern about going one level deeper is that I've noticed that when you're fact checking, like let's say, so there's the guy that does the diet wars. He's like, this keto person said this false thing. The net result is that people think that the diet wars guy is against keto, but he's not really. He's just saying this fact that this keto person said was wrong. And so a concern with all of these, including kind of like the gun one that we did, was that it sounds like we're picking a side. And it would be nice if we could find a way to not pick a side, or to make it apparent that we're not picking sides. And one way I've thought of doing that is picking out one thing from each side to that we either debunk or show truthful, as long as they're both the same way. Like we need to show that they're both truthful or they're both debunked. Some way we need to show, hey, here's some evidence we have for the pro side, and here's some evidence we have for the con side on the ultimate decision, even though we may not even call it out and say that's the ultimate decision. Of course, that may not be possible if everything's one-sided. But
as long as they're the same way is also dangerous phrasing, given that is the fundamental issue for the top level, that there's many things of different weights.
Well, I know not the same weight, but the same side. Like if we prove these two to be true, then, or we have to prove these true to be false. Not saying how much they are and how they combine against each other, then it works. But if we proved one true and one false, then we're siding on one side, right? Does that make sense? So we could investigate them all, but we need to show that we're providing evidence for both sides or debunking both sides, not just if they happen to come out one true and one false, people would get the intuition that we're pushing for one side of the issue. Is one thought I'm thinking of doing it. So that's my other concern about doing these kind of fact checks, is it sounds like you're taking a side on an issue. So I thought there was another way I had. The other way is just to have a disclaimer at the top that says, we're not saying that qualified immunity should be thing. That is still an open issue and it's a very complex issue. But here is our analysis on, will it reduce harm to people, right? So either a disclaimer or to do two that balance each other out. Not balance, but that show that we're not focusing on, we're not cherry picking one side of the argument. I guess just a disclaimer might work.
Yeah, I mean, the cherry picking issue is going to be pronounced, since whether or not people think we are is going to be largely influenced by whether or not they think it reach a correct conclusion. Because there's what, a quarter of people in the country who refuse to get a COVID vaccine.
Well,
they're going
but
to think it's cherry picked.
Right. But if we put one reason, if we fact check one thing and it says, oh, according to this thing, it increased that you should get a vaccine, and according to this other thing, you decrease the vaccine, then they know we're not cherry picking one side of the argument. That makes sense.
It does from our perspective, but I don't think that they're going to see it that way. I think that's going to be a common issue.
How would they not see it that way?
Because just seeing that we have some from either side won't make it feel like we're giving a good faith effort for them. Plus, I think there are sources that we just won't use because they're very low quality, like, was it Seth Rogen, or I don't know if it's the right name, but some of the people who are just really out there making stuff up, but are persuasive to some people.
If we find and prove true a reason to take it and a reason not to take it, I mean, there are reasons to not take the vaccine. They're just not as important as the other reasons. But if we don't do that final analysis that says what is more important, and we just put both up there, then when they know we're not, I mean, I don't think anyone would look at that and say, oh, you're biased, because they wouldn't be able to say which way we're biased. You know what I'm saying? Because if we're saying we're not making a conclusion, we're just debunking these two facts, and this one fact supports the main conclusion that we're not doing, and the other one puts it against the main conclusion. What way are they going to say we're biased? They can't say we're biased one way or the other, because we're supporting both sides.
Yeah, maybe I need to see an example of how or specific this intended to be, because I might be envisioning it a little differently than you are.
So, well, like this one. So if we say, not by how much, but let's say it does that, if we, for qualified immunity, that it will reduce harm and then to people. And then we said, if we reduce qualified immunity, it will increase harm to police officers. Now, we're not going to compare the two. We're not going to put them head to head and come to a conclusion. But we're going to say, here's, there's lots of reasons. Here's a reason for it, and here's a reason against it. Both are true, and here's the evidence that they're true, in case you're having a debate about it. Or probably better yet, if we debunk one, a statement from one side and we have next to it a debunking of a statement on the other side of the debate, then people can't say we're biased because they don't.
And that's assuming that we end up with debunkings that balance each other out, which I don't know we can assume.
Well, there is no, we wouldn't be claiming and would be clearly stating that they're not balancing each other out, that they're unrelated. They're just, I mean, they're related to the people making the final conclusion, but we're leaving that up to the audience. I mean, sure, I mean, it's theoretical that we could debunk something really stupid on one side and debunk, but we're supposed to be steel manning both sides. So, I just think if we let's use debunking as an example. If we don't debunk a statement on both sides, they don't have to be like perfectly the same way. But I mean, yeah, if we did something really stupid on one side and really thing on the other, they'd say we're biased. But it would be, I think it'd be harder to do that than just find two things to debunk. I mean, unless one side's just being stupid, but I think we could. There's usually, if you're talking about making a decision, there is always the top level decision. There are always good reasons not to do it. It's the weighting of those two. So, I mean, there is a chance that you will. Well, first of all, it irritated me when they said, you take the vaccine, you won't get sick. That's wrong, because the symptoms of the vaccine for many people is that you feel sick for a day. Now, that's not the same definition of the word sick they meant. They meant you wouldn't get the virus, but you did get sick.
Yeah, whereas from my experience, that wasn't the messaging that I got about it. So,
well, I mean, that's what I saw, that messaging, and it irritated me. And I saw it a lot, which irritated me because it's like, I mean, that was even on the flu vaccine back. It's just they weren't clear when they stated, and that may have been the news organizations, not the right. So they're, because
yeah, and I don't have
it's
cable,
just,
so I don't see cable news.
well, no, I'm not talking about cable. I'm talking like ABC morning show, right? And they're
I
like,
don't have TV,
oh,
I
you
don't have
won't
TV
get
at all.
sick when you take it, right? No, but millions of people do, so it's kind of an important thing. And people on social media.
Yeah, social media was definitely making false claims about it.
Well, right, but so both sides were making ambiguous claims that were causing problems. Yeah, so I don't know yet whether it would be of any value to go just one level down, or if we'd have to go deeper into this debate to find something that's more of a less of a evaluating two different things. I mean, is it even worthwhile saying it will reduce harm? I mean, are there some people out there claiming that, even if you turn off qualified immunity, it won't actually reduce the number of people that are getting arrested illegally or getting shot or that are innocent, stuff like that.
And it's hard to fact check that too, because we have so little information to actually answer that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So I don't know if any of these work, because it's just qualified immunity is one of those things that I think there is very little data for. You can correct me if you found some, but
Yeah, there's just not a lot, since it's been the law of the land, except in only a couple of places, and those are recent changes.
so one other option is just take this out of our top 5 and save it for later.
I'm feeling like, because this is feeling more complex in my head now rather than less, it would be helpful if by the time I got back on Tuesday, you had at least like one example of something that was sufficiently narrowed down and laid out in the way that you're envisioning it. Because I don't know that's from my understanding of it right now, I'd end up with something that reflects what you're looking for.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I'm saying I don't. My gut is let's just set this aside and move on to the other items and pick something else to replace it, and come back to it. I don't think that any of these will be easily made into something more fact checky. But we do have like the concealed carry reduces crime, right? That one was kind of clear.
It
You
is
know,
more fact checky, though the end result was, yeah, I mean, it being mixed is not the worst.
yeah, right. Yeah, we could show that like the first glance of all the studies show there's a high chance that it doesn't reduce crime. And then people can come in on each individual study and say, well, this study doesn't actually fit because they did their numbers wrong. And we can have that debate on the studies. But in the end, it's not, taking two values and weighing, human life versus money, right? So I think we could put, I think for now, unless you really don't like the idea, we'll just set aside qualified immunity, and we'll find another more fact checky item to use. And I guess we need to review the other the other items we have to see if they're fact checky.
Yeah, I don't think that should reduce meat consumption probably meets a new qualification. We'd want to make it specifically a health question for that, or specifically an environmental question, or some particular facet of it.
Sorry, for which one?
The average US resident should reduce meat consumption.
Right. Yeah. Right. So, yeah. Right. Because then you get into concepts of, you're comparing, like climate change, the value of the climate versus the value of life, how much it is to live your life and personal preference of types of foods to eat. So, I thought I had listed in here what our top five were.
We had them in the meeting documents. Let me pull that up. Okay, yeah, it's not shorted. The five we had was qualified immunity, concealed carry, housing first, fraud in US elections, and whether keto negatively affects long-term heart health.
I guess I didn't rewrite the keto one. What day was that in? Was that just last week?
Is the 14th.
Leave it down there. I need to make a flag for this. Oh, probably later. Yeah, so those are all kind of does, does as opposed to shoulds. So it'd be nice to probably get back up to 5. Seeing this is another should. So
Yeah, honestly, the red light cameras one would be I think nice and narrow for this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was really irritated that they took some of those laws away. One of my friends said, "Well, you can't confront your accuser," and I'm like, "You can confront the police officer that was looking at the video that decided that video violated." It's like just because the police officer is watching you do it through a video, as opposed to a police officer watching it through his windshield, it's still technology that lets light through once just laid. It's like you're really like looking for reasons not to do it. But there's probably other reasons not to do it. But
Not to do the red light cameras, you mean?
yeah. But just the one my friend was saying was just ludicrous.
Yeah, there are some, but that's one that has some pretty solid data about it. So, like it's found that it actually increases the rate of crashes.
Oh, because people trying to stop.
Yeah,
Or
people panicking and stopping more abruptly, even in situations where it's not necessarily safe. But also, if I recall correctly, and this is straight up municipalities making a choice to try to increase revenue, they tended to decrease the length of the yellow after implementing red light cameras, which would feed into the same issue.
Yeah.
I want to double check that one because I remember reading that, but I want to make sure that it was a
Well, it's just
valid source.
interesting to hear some of the other cons because I hadn't looked into it yet, but I knew that they were taking it down, and just the explanations I heard were pretty crazy. But those sound more reasonable, especially like the people stopping and stuff like that. I mean, that's like unintended consequences. So yeah, I think that'll be an interesting one. Okay, so we have our top 5. So I think that that's a real good thing. So next Monday we have next Tuesday, we have our user experience. Is that next Tuesday? Yeah. UX meeting for 2 hours.
I'm just tossing a Scientific American article about it if you want to read it.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah. That'd be a really good source for this as well.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, so with that, I think if you're eager to get off to
Yeah, having a bit of extra time would help because I need to drop somebody off, then load everything into the car, then pick somebody up, and then get out to the campsite.
yeah. Let me